That was kind of sad. I know, thank you. You're wonderful. All right, so who's ready to hear more from, maybe they're tweeting it, hashtag Different Games 2016. I'm not quitting my day job to become a comedian, I'm sorry. All right, everyone, so welcome to an education of one's own, bringing intersectional discussion to games education. We're really excited to have our keynotes continuing the discussion and bringing along some other fabulous presenters. Brief introduction of them. Emily Flynn Jones is a postdoctoral research at York University doing historical games research that looks at representation and participation. Yes. She recently designed the curriculum for an undergraduate course on gender and games. Stephanie Fisher is a PhD candidate at York University. She is active in the community and works in formal learning initiatives to promote female education. Helen Kennedy is not here. Jennifer Jensen and Susan de Castell we just heard from, and we're going to continue hearing from them. So without further ado, I will turn it over to them.
Too big. Okay. Okay, so... Whoa. Okay. Troubles. Okay, so this was a session obviously on teaching game studies and incorporating gender studies, critical race studies. My water bottle looks lonely. Into your curriculum and the importance of doing that, being that these are subjects that have been rather absent from games. But it's not just about the content of our game studies curriculum, it's also about the classroom and problems of inclusivity in those spaces. So we're gonna talk about a little bit about the state of game studies and why we might need to think about bringing different lenses and having stronger discussions about gender. We'll show a couple of curriculum samples from Stephanie and myself. Then we're going to talk a little bit about inclusive teaching practices, and this is where we throw it over to Jen and Suzanne again. And then, depending on time is going, we'll either share some advice or our favorite resources and recommendations for introducing gender discussions into the game studies classroom, or we'll just Q&A it to see what it is that you guys have questions about. Okay, so a little bit to the scale of the problem. As part of the Refiguring Innovation in Games project, we've done a bit of a sweep of the courses in Ontario. So there are 47 public institutions that have game design programs. And these are the kind of titles that you're looking at. Really inventive things like Game 1, Game 2. And these, these examples don't even include the, like, oh my God, I think it's like another 80 or 90 that are just elective courses in like non-game programs. So what we're not seeing here is any kind of signaling about critical discussions around gender, critical race studies, intersectionality, feminism, or sexuality or sexual orientation. Recently, we have started having discussions again about the state of game studies. And over the past 2 years, FDG, the Foundation of Digital Games, and DIGRA, the Digital Games Research Association, at their annual conferences, they held workshops between 14 people. And so this is what they turned out in their syllabus workshop. Only 3 of the syllabi have gender-focused sessions at all. 1 out of those 14 has a queer studies focused session. 0 discuss critical race studies or representation, and 0 discuss intersectionality. There's also reports following each of these workshops, and there is no mention in 8 or 9 page documents that this is a critical gap. Okay, so we're just gonna run through a couple of curriculum examples. First up, Stephanie Fisher.
Oops. Hello, everybody. Yeah. You okay? Okay. All right. So, hi, I'm Stephanie Fisher. In 2013, I was teaching at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology in a program called Adult Education in Digital Technology. I inherited a course called Serious Games and Simulations that was originally developed for an entirely different faculty. It was called the Faculty of Business and IT. And it was my job, and that was in the university's game development and entrepreneurship program. So it was my job to take that syllabus and make it appropriate for students in the Adult Education and Digital Technology program in the Faculty of Education. The difference is the students in my program were adults, they were mid-career professionals already working as educators in non-school environments, so like i.e. corporate education. And one of them worked at like Royal Bank of Canada. And they were enrolled into the adult education program more for professional development to learn how to incorporate digital tools and technology into their work. So it was not, that program itself was not focused on games. And basically my task was to tweak a syllabus that was intended to train undergraduate game developer students looking to get entry-level jobs in the game industry. And these students also had a background knowledge of games, culture, and industry. So I had to change a course meant for those people to be relevant to people who wouldn't be working in the games industry but needed to understand how this medium could be used for education in a variety of environments. And I should have showed you that slide, but okay, so the approach I took to developing this course is something that we call stealth feminism. That's where the syllabus and the content of the work is grounded in feminist media criticism and pedagogy, but I actually never mentioned the F word or said that's what was happening. So it was basically an interventionist approach to changing a syllabus that kind of seemed devoid of any politics, which means it was actually upholding the status quo, and infusing it with stealthy feminist goodness. So the major changes I did for learning outcomes, the first two were, just kind of business as usual. The ones in bold are that's where the stealthy feminist parts happen. So the original syllabus was very heavy on skills. For example, it was about how to make a serious game that was basically an edutainment game. The final project in the original syllabus accounted for 70% of the final grade. So what I did to make it relevant to my students was I added activities that had students basically engaging in critical reflection and conversations either with themselves or self-reflection activities. They did blog posts, we had them review articles, self-reflection, etc. And important to this was to add content and add readings that weren't part of the canon. So no James Paul G was allowed. And specifically include articles or games that were produced by women, people of color, or engaged with critical theory. And it felt like it was basically really important to do this kind of like academic signal boosting because, we always end up citing the same people over and over again. And I wanted, in my course, people to, us to cite the work of people who aren't really cited all that often, at least in the larger kind of, So I wanted to kind of signal boost them. Especially people in work that's written by marginalized people to basically disrupt this emerging canon of game studies and game-based learning that is really centered around largely anecdotal work of, old dudes, white males who came from and were well respected in other disciplines like communications or linguists. The context, it's really unusual. I felt really lucky because my circumstances were quite unusual. First of all, my students were not game players. They didn't identify as gamers. They didn't grow up with playing video games. And so I didn't really have to deal with this kind of gamer knowledge. For all I knew, or for all they knew, learning about the affordances of games grounded in a feminist and intersectional perspective was the norm. Yay, right? So I was positioned. Second of all, I was positioned in my faculty as the resident games and learning expert by my dean, my program director, and other faculty members. So simply put, I was the instructor in the Faculty of Education that was the games person. And I can't overstate how important that support was as a young mixed-race woman teaching in a faculty full of predominantly older white guys in a technology-focused university. And not everyone has that. I actually don't know anyone else that really has that. I had an RA to assist me, who was also a woman. And total enrollment for my course was 8 students, and 5 of them were women. So women already outnumbered men, which is typical in a faculty of education, but not when it specifically comes to like educational technology courses. So what I'm saying is that my conditions were excellent, and this was not normal, but it should be normal. Oops, my notes. So this approach I think was successful. They had to make a final game. They had to write a paper about it. And in their paper, they incorporated materials and arguments from the critical readings into their games and papers. They weren't straight up edutainment games or serious educational games without any thought, for about like diverse players or diverse audiences. So, I just put up an excerpt that's, might not seem significant, but I thought it was good that they just didn't say like you can choose a boy or a girl. It's like no, they actually incorporated like people feel better, or people are more engaged when they can create an avatar that looks like them. So they put that thought into there. And then so my issue though here is that stealth feminism is that like I'm not naming my politics. Then feminism doesn't get the credit for making the difference. I don't exactly feel right about that by not being explicit and using the F word, but I thought that's something we can chat a little bit more about in Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, so about last summer, I was hired to create a games program, a games course entirely about gender in games. I was given the precise learning outcomes, so I kind of inherited this quite problematic framework and just kind of had to worm my way around it a little bit. So this is a degree level course and is an online course. It was a strange online course for me where I have taught online before, where you'd have simultaneous online seminars. That's not the case. I would just create some interactive lectures, leave them there, and then give students activities and grade them at the end. So that was a real challenge. In terms of content, I wanted to look across issues. I didn't want to just look at games themselves. I wanted to make sure that this was socially situated. So we have Introduction to Gender Studies and Game Studies, the idea of the digital divide. We have only 2 representation classes, which is strange, and I'll tell you why in a second. We also had 3 critical play sessions. We looked at masculinities in gamings, and the concept of intersectionality was really woven through all of our sessions. So there were a couple of things that I wanted to really think about in developing this course, and the first one is accessibility. Being online doesn't necessarily mean that your student on the other end is going to have access to the tools that you might require or might expect them to play a game. So we need to think cross-platform. We need to think about varying levels of experience with play and not just giving people games that assume a lot of knowledge about mechanics, because this was a course that was available across programs. I wanted diversity of examples of games, something that was actually really difficult to fight with in my institution. They wanted like all the brand new games. They wanted only Lara Croft to be the example of a strong female character. So I tried to pick games that were about sexuality. There's a lot of people in this room actually whose games I've used. So that showed the trans experience. Thank you, Maddie, for giving me permission to use your game. And so I also always wanted to make sure that the discussion didn't situate games in a cultural vacuum. So we looked at patriarchy, we looked at gender roles and how those come into games, and then sort of become part of this sort of cultural cycle that reasserts the normativity of particular types of gender acts and performances. So I'm just finishing running this for the first time, and there are some problems that I'm noticing. First of all, institutional oversight. I had very little control over what it was that this course was going to look like. So I threw out what I thought were really, really good ideas, and then they moved things around. So the session that we have describing intersectionality, which is throughout the course, got moved to the very end of the course because it didn't fit well enough with the assignments and due dates. So that's really super problematic. We talk about it all the way through, and then are like, oh, by the way, boo, that's what we were doing. So that wasn't particularly helpful. I also was limited in terms of readings that I can assign because this institution does not have access to a lot of those behind the paywall sort of journals and magazines. So that sort of restricted who I could point them towards in terms of literature. So I couldn't raise up some of the voices that I wanted to. I was really surprised to find that with only 2 classes and 1.5 classes on representation, we looked at like the industry, player demographics, all sorts of things. Students took away that this course was entirely about representation of women in games. Also, having to deal with disengagement, I did encounter what is kind of a huge problem in games, in education in games anyways, this idea of gamer knowledge. I really encountered a lot of pushback about what constitutes a game, and that the games that I was giving them by Nina Freeman were not games, they didn't count. And just quite altogether denying that any of these, that there were issues for women who were trying to play online, that they weren't part of the problem, right? So I had a lot of not all men that I had to speak back to, and not being in a conversational classroom, doing that is only with the one person. So that's something I'm gonna have to really integrate or assume that might be a problem in future, and sort of really put that up there as not being a valid argumentation. So there was a couple of things that I think worked really, really well, and that's the first assignment in particular, which was a personal history gaming assignment. So I asked them to read a beautiful article, and really, really concise and sweet article by Bell Hooks called Understanding Patriarchy. It's like 4 pages long. And she talks about her first encounters with patriarchy being through acts of play. And not engaging in gender-appropriate acts of play and being chastised for that. So I asked them to read that and then think about how they've engaged with games over the years, and how they might think how their gender has come into that, whether it's allegations of gender inappropriate or deviant acts from others, or whether they were sort of influenced socially as to what they were drawn towards or what have you. And I think that was a really important self-reflexive exercise for a lot of people. Also, another really, really good project, and the things that worked actually were assignments. So it was a speculative game design project where they were asked to look again at their personal history and fill out a game design document template and create a story-based game about their experiences and what was important to them about their gendered experiences, or their any sort of lines of oppression that they felt. We talked about like physical ability, all types of gender identity, sexual orientation, and race. So they could pick what they wanted to talk about in that game, and I really wish that I could share them actually with the rest of the classes. But yeah, so I'm happy to make that course outline available online. It was I really, really liked what I did, but the order of it is not perfect. So before we move into talking about classroom practices, a little example of very bad classroom practice.
Hey, just wanted to see how your class was going. Where is everybody?
There is no class.
Did you send everyone to the principal's office already?
No one signed up.
That's not your fault.
I called the department secretary to see what happened. Apparently, I have a reputation for being obnoxious.
What?
Hey, Sheldon, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Now I can devote all my time to dark matter.
Oh, you bought cookies for everyone?
Oh yes, Fig Newtons. I was going to ask them which scientist both helped to develop calculus and had a famous cookie named after him. And then after someone said Newton, I was going to tell them they're wrong. The cookies are named after a town in Massachusetts. And then I'd throw the cookies away.
Hey, what if I took your class?
Why would you do that?
Yeah, why would you do that?
What's wrong with you?
Thinking about getting my doctorate? He wants to teach? Why not?
No, Howard, look, I appreciate the gesture, but this is a graduate level physics class. I don't think you'd understand a single thing I was talking about.
Ask why not again. I've got an answer.
Sheldon, I'm more than smart enough to take your class.
No.
Yes.
How would you determine the ground state of a quantum system with no exact solution?
I would guess a wave function and then vary its parameters until I found the lowest energy solution.
All right, that's the end of the funny due to time. So, Suzanne?
Oh, good notes. Okay, well, that's the first point. Well, I think it's probably worth talking about kind of examples, maybe, as well. I think that's fairly eloquent in a way because one of the things that you learn after a while trying to do inclusive education is that, and we knew this a million years ago as feminists before you were all born, you're all so sweet and young, which is that you don't add women and stir. But still, inclusive education does seem to be like that. And so, for example, we forget that there are some people from whom you can't learn. Like, you can't learn from those people. We forget that there's incredible trauma that education has imposed on people that makes them spend about 80% of their emotional and intellectual energy just trying to stay alive, just trying to survive in that situation. So one of the things that that has become increasingly apparent to me in doing more outreach work, community-based work with really disadvantaged populations, people that are left out, is that it takes you don't just get to the content. You actually have to do this process work that allows, it's so corny, that allows people to feel safe, community cohesion and self-care. And those little rituals that people, especially people like me from my generation, kind of poo-poo, like we don't have time for that, we're not doing the hand-holding stuff. But when you really do this work, what you understand is that that is critical, that when you're designing your curriculum, you can start by saying all the things you want to teach, but then you have to double up the time that you need and insert into each of those things work that is self-care work that is checking in with people, work that is things like, how did you sleep? How is this feeling? Work that is play, work that's clapping games and singing games. And this is not stupid. This is the way that we release people from the stranglehold of the trauma of formal education. It's incredible to see the difference when you do that, because what I've seen is people who I know from their records, from what they've told me, they can't sit in classes, they can't do academic work, and they're not successful. They're the students that are flunking out, that can hardly get a place in a college classroom. And I've seen those students sit for 4 or 5 hours over a bunch of code, debugging and tearing it all up and trying again and looking online and reading books. And these are the same people, and they're actually super smart. So I really just want to sort of flag that as a really important and undervalued part of curriculum planning, is planning to make people feel okay and feel free enough to be as smart as they really are. So that's my first point. What do you want to say?
Am I pressing the slide button?
No, there's more. Do you want to say more?
Oh.
Ooh, you get that. The
I
diving.
don't want that. Okay, I just want to say two more things about this. One is that, and as Emily and Steph talked about and Suzanne just mentioned, but I think as someone who's situated in higher education, I think there's a couple of things that are really important to say. One is that these higher educational institutions are not immune to patriarchy, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and all that kind of stuff. And yet we expect that somehow they are, and they're really not. And certainly one of the things that becomes really challenging when you're doing this kind of work, and I think it's the including point, is that you have to reorganize your class, including these kind of formal classes, in order to make it possible for folks who might not be able to sit for even 20 minutes, who need to get up and check out and come back in. We actually have to restructure the way that we're doing things. And I think that both of these examples, which were both online, some of these possibilities can come through those other kinds of structures where the talking white guy is less visible. But I still think that that's really what's happening as we're doing this, as we are in these institutions. And it's very difficult to fight against as well. And the expectation is that the structures are set up so that you can, so that it supports patriarchy. Oh, no flipping.
I want to talk about you. Jen was just doing, I'll tell you all about Jen now. She was just doing some work in schools, and one of the things she came back and said, I can hardly stand to be there. You can't believe what it's like in all the schools that I'm going to. The kids who are autistic or developmentally delayed or have other kinds of problems. What were the kids that you were?
That's all of those.
That's all of them. They basically sit in the classroom, so that's what we call inclusion. They sit in the classroom with headphones on, headsets on, and they stare at a screen, and it's like they don't exist. The classroom is going on, and they don't exist. They're not really there. And I think that for a lot of times we forget, because we don't take the time to really talk to folks, that that's how we treat people of difference. And we were really privileged in the program I just finished to have 3 completely deaf or hard of hearing people in the class. And the stuff that we learned by just paying attention was amazing, which is that a lot of the ways that we value teaching, the kind of chatty, conversational thing, looking around the room, having lots of things happening at once, it's the same thing as putting on the headsets and shutting them out. I mean, those people are in the room, but we're not speaking to them, they're not hearing us. And in fact, interestingly, in order to really be effective working with deaf or hard of hearing students in that context, what we found was we had to return to completely traditional pedagogy. Put up your hand if you want to speak. Look me in the eye. Look at my face so you can see my lips. Make sure that you have, bold, clear writing. Do not let people talk over one another. The chatter that you think is so cool is making it impossible for these people to learn. What I'm trying to say here is, if we're going to go out into industry and say, you need to be more inclusive, we need to learn how to do that. And how to do that isn't just changing things on the side, it's actually changing education for everybody to make it inclusive. So it's not welcome to my party. It's that this is not the same party at all. So lots of talking.
Yeah, you did that.
Yeah, I did that.
Okay,
I did
this
that.
is our
Okay,
last
I'll shut
little
up
one. No. So this is just a small point about symptoms versus structures. We hear a lot about symptoms. We hear about the fact that there are not enough women in the tech industry. We hear about what kind of symptomatically is wrong. Including what we just, from an educational standpoint, from a from a standpoint of what goes on in meetings, from a standpoint of what goes on in everyday business. Those are all symptoms of this problem of women in tech or games or whatever. But when you start looking at how these things are structured, you actually need, it changes the ways that you think about it. So structural, and we talked about this in our talk, but it's just really small. These are deep structural problems. Patriarchy wasn't born yesterday. It has, as Mary Beard showed, it has such a long history. It operates every day and every night, as Dorothy Smith would say. So does homophobia. So does all kinds of these kinds of things. And those are structural problems. So as Suzanne said, what we have to do is we actually have to change the structures of how we're doing things in order to get to, I really think, including other than inclusion. And that means changing rooms. It means changing the ways that we talk about stuff. It also means who talks about things. Sometimes people don't want to talk. It's also not forcing people to talk who don't want to speak. Not speaking for others unless you have their permission, etc. So that's all we wanted to say on that.
That's all I want to say.
Do you want to do a Q&A? Yeah, Q&A.
We would like to hear from people about their experiences of trying to do inclusive game education, or attempts that they've made or problems that they've encountered, because we've talked so much, and especially I have. Or just ask
We won't
questions.
bite.
Damn it. Just ask
Biting.
questions.
No biting. Yeah.
So you guys talk a lot about how you can do this self-feminism, but you guys have a kind of position of power because you're creating.
Totally.
So as, I guess, as students, how do you guys engage in a way that we can have agency over the way that we're being defined, in a way that our curriculum is equal, so we're not only hearing about straight white cis men, if those positions of power are not filled with people who are actively trying to do.
Oh, that is such a good question, and Steph just handed me the mic. As an instructor and someone who's been doing this a long time, I will never not enjoy if someone asks for my syllabus in advance and actually says, hello, are you going to include this one or this one? I know that that's not the case for my colleagues, but I think one way to start, even from a subordinate position, is to go, bottom down, top up, and ask. The other thing to do is, and because this just happened in my university, when they're redoing the curriculum, even if it's on the undergraduate or graduate level, get on those dang committees and make some noise, because that makes a huge difference. You think it doesn't, but it really does. And that's where the structural changes at the university happens, is on those curriculum committees, and there are people. Those committees can really rock. That doesn't take care of the power structures, and I don't know how you would necessarily get around them unless you pulled another faculty member outside with you and said, this is what you can do.
Or you get critical mass going. But I mean, it doesn't help if you're in a class of 100 and 3 of you are women. But that's another way, like getting critical mass and demanding. Demanding that these readings be included. I'm a student too. I try not to cite old white dead dudes a lot. And then I think if it's a well-written paper, then instructors will include the resources that I'm including in my paper into their syllabus. So it's almost like you're teaching back, right? But learning is a two-way street. Not every instructor thinks that way, that they can learn from their students. So yeah, no, it's a battle, but you do what you got to do and get support where you can. Anyone else?
Stealth feminism definitely has its place. Could you tell us about times where you were anything but stealth in your approach, where you had to actually live smack down and be like, no, this is now what's... I was teaching in Australia when lesbian first sort of hit, and
Yeah.
And I was really hoping that you might have some stories of experiences in the classroom where you were anything but stealthy.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Sometimes the intervention requires, explicit feminist intervention as well. And I remember one conversation that had to do with, we didn't really talk a lot about culture. It was a lot about, game-based learning. But they got onto the topic of violence in video games. And this is where all the gendered stereotypes came out. These are games boys play. Girls would not do that. And at first I just I had a TA, so I let them, try to handle it, but I could see she was struggling, and then we're running out of time too, and I did not want to end the class on this note. So then I kind of did that thing where I'm like, I've been a gender and games researcher for the last 6 years, and here are my findings, and you guys are just wrong, and laid the smack down, and it didn't feel good, but again, sometimes explicit feminist intervention is required. Yeah, so I mean, when you kind of get into these topics where people think they know because, violence in video games, et cetera, everyone has something to say on that, and they, just lean on these tropes. But yeah, that's one example that I can think of. But otherwise, the class was pretty good.
Well, I had one, and I'll be quick because I saw another hand that appeared. That didn't go so well. It was pre-Gamergate, and I was giving a talk on gender video games stuff, rehearsed some of the bad stuff that had happened prior to that, and then had done the big kind of reveal of our research. And then I had a question by this guy who always sat up front. He was one of the more well-read, enthusiastic students who threw up his hand and said, "Well, but I get abuse online." And I said, "Okay. What kind?" "Well, it's sometimes homophobic." "Is it homophobic always?" "Well, no." "Well, okay. So what are you trying to tell me?" He said, "Well, I just have thick skin about it." And I said, "All right, well, that's enough. I'm not talking about you, and I'm also not talking about, the majority of gamers who are online. We're actually talking about the people for whom this matters, which is, all these others over here." And I was not polite, and that was more polite than what I did to him in class. But what happened after that is I lost him entirely. That was it. It was done. He was gone. And I never got him back. He would talk to the person that I was co-teaching with because she was hadn't done the speech act. But there was no reclaiming that. And this was someone who was really enjoying the course. So I think that when you do those things too, you can lose people. And not that it's a bad thing. I'm still not, and I don't feel bad for doing it. But it's one of those things that can happen. And it was also, a power struggle with him that I refused. Yeah.
Plenty. Kashona Gray is amazing. Her work is about playing as a black woman online. Some other babes. I think there's some important masculinity stuff happening, which doesn't normally really excite me. I'm like, I don't want to talk about you. But Nick Taylor is producing some interesting work on player dynamics in through The Walking Dead and performances of masculinity in online spaces. Nick Taylor, North Carolina State. Intentional Bodies by T.L. Taylor is an older one, but I think a really important one. It is about representation. And she goes in and speaks to industry representatives, and they talk about the many reasons that even the best intentions for representation get interrupted, but that there is responsibility there as well.
Andre Brock is he at Brock University still? No? Okay. That's a name to look up, though. Andre Brock does, again, really good race and representation online and in-game.
Stephanie Fisher, who's right here, who also, with Suzanne and I, we had a study that we have now replicated in 5 different environments where we show that facts about girls are actually attributed to novice play behavior through comparative studies with unskilled game-playing boys. Should read that. It's good.
I would just want to say I can also give my syllabus to anyone who wants it, because I'm blanking on some of the more important ones. And actually, try looking at non-academic sources. First-person scholar. Go there.
Yeah, Catherine Cross's account of Gamergate and First Person Scholar is just one of the best sort of descriptions of that situation that I found. Yeah, so how about we share both our syllabuses and course outlines on our website, refig.ca. So yeah, you can grab cards from here if you want to be able to find that, and it'll be on our blog. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this went
Join the panel.
I am now on this panel. So I actually just started a representation in games class this semester. And it's the first, and there's a whole bunch of factors that are maybe some people might be able to relate to. One is I'm working on my master's at the same time, and my background is actually is in literature. So I'm and I didn't have access to an academic database for the past 6 or so years. So I had to design a very broad representation in games, which means not just gender and not just race, but 6 different categories in 14 weeks. To people who are in this program who don't necessarily have not necessarily read any critical theory ever, or mostly are in kind of computer science kind of backgrounds. And so I kind of just wanted, many times I feel like some people forget that when we do teach these things, it's to people who have no frame of reference to any theory, and that a lot of times in order to kind of do things that are intersectional, you also can't use a lot of texts that are available to you. And so basically I've had to all of my things I literally could just Google Judith Butler and just took a PDF. That's basically my course, no one has to buy a book as well, which was kind of important to me. So I kind of had to literally Google every single thing, and basically, and that's kind of what people have done, that I had to do. And it's been a quite interesting experience because I had to get people on my side in a way, but in a way starting out the entire class, being here is where we're going to go. Here's a syllabus of things you do not understand, but I have another way. And I guess the thing that I started off my class with was saying, I'm not making you into an academic. Actually, I want you to kind of hold that thought for a while. What I want you to do is have an interesting opinion about this conversation. And I feel like that kind of has been sort of my experience of trying to win people over, because these are kids who are students, you're not kids, students who don't write critical essays. They make games and they code. So I'm how do I get them over? And actually, when I think it was you who mentioned, one thing that was really successful was asking people to find their own articles. So basically, I gave them a list of searches. So I say, look at First Person Scholar, Critical Distance, Gama Sutra, and whatever, and just find things on each of these topics. And funny enough, a lot of people who are my peers appear in my class, which is super cool. But like that doesn't, I'm pretty sure that doesn't happen very often. And so it's just been kind of interesting, like way of trying to kind of like get people who don't know anything and like say like, okay, I'm gonna sit down these sort of game study students and actually work through gender trouble with them, or work through marks, or work through all these things, and then have that thing. So I think it's interesting, especially when it's hard to kind of just do one course at a time. So like just gender in games is kind of fraught, right? And I kind of said I won't do just gender in games, but the bad part about that is doing everything at once is also incredibly difficult. So that was my experience. I kind of wanted to share that with people. Yay, so you can have your chair back. Here you go. You want a mic back?
Cheers.
Yeah.
Big.
More, just a little bit more.
That one. I honestly think it's the one that I said, that one. I think we want to help people make different games by actually helping them think differently. That's what theory's for. It's not because you're going to necessarily put it into practice. It's the thought exercise. And so, there's great theory in education that poses the question, what if we started from the premise that everyone is of equal intelligence, and then what happens? Dun, 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 dun. So I think it's a huge question. It's certainly one that we're all struggling with, but I think that the end goal is to get people to think differently and make differently. And we're done.